Long ago in the year 1326, a man named Hugh Despenser the Younger was given a death so awful, people talked about it for centuries. It happened in a town called Hereford. Hugh was tied up in front of a crowd. His body was hurt in terrible ways. He didn't just die. He was tortured piece by piece. It wasn't a normal punishment. It was a message meant to scare anyone who ever got too close to power. You see, Hugh wasn't just any man. He had been the closest friend and advisor to King Edward II. Some say he controlled the king. Some say he ruled the country from behind the throne. For many years, Hugh acted like he could do whatever he wanted. He took land from nobles. He hurt people who stood in his way. Even Queen Isabella, the king's wife, couldn't stop him. But when she finally did fight back, she made sure Hugh's death was more than just a punishment. She made it a show, a terrible show, meant to show the whole kingdom what happens to men who think they're above everyone else. Writers who lived back then usually didn't talk much about bloody deaths. But Hugh's story was different. They wrote every detail because they knew this was not just the end of one man. It was the end of a time filled with fear and power gone wrong. So who was Hugh Despenser? How did he rise so high? And why did so many people want him dead? This is the true story of a man who became too powerful, and the horrifying way his story ended. Before Hugh Despenser, there had been another favorite, a man named Piers Gaveston. Gaveston liked being rich and having fancy titles. But Hugh wanted something more. He didn't just want gold or power. He wanted to control the king and run the kingdom himself. By the year 1318, Hugh had become King Edward II's closest friend. Many people even whispered that they were more than just friends. But Hugh was different from the others. He was smart and he was ruthless. He didn't just want to be near the king. He wanted to speak for the king, to make the king's decisions, to be the real ruler without wearing the crown. Hugh started getting special jobs in the royal court. In 1322, he was made royal chamberlain, a very powerful job. That meant Hugh could see the king whenever he wanted. He could stop others from talking to the king. He controlled what the king heard and who the king listened to. Slowly, Hugh began cutting the king off from the rest of his advisors. He didn't want anyone else to have the king's ear. But Hugh wasn't just clever. He was cruel too. He made lists of powerful lords who might try to stop him. Then, he used tricky laws to take away their land. He had some of their family members locked in prison and their rights taken away. He used fear to keep people quiet. The place Hugh wanted most was the Welsh Marches, rich land near the border of Wales. Other nobles had ruled those lands for years, but Hugh found ways to start fights with them, then took their lands after they lost. Soon he owned more land than many royal families. He was rich, he was feared, and most of all, he was protected by the king. Unlike others who just used the king's friendship to stay safe, Hugh did something more dangerous. He used laws and courts to make everything look legal. He filled courtrooms with his friends. He used paper and rules to make his land stealing look fair. But it wasn't fair, not at all. By 1324, Hugh Despenser wasn't just helping the king, he was ruling England himself, and everyone knew it. King Edward II trusted Hugh Despenser more than anyone else. He didn't make big choices without asking Hugh first. Even visitors from other countries said it was useless to meet the king unless Hugh was there. The real power was with the favorite, not the crown. The other lords, the nobles, felt left out. They used to help rule the kingdom. Now they were ignored, watching while Hugh made all the decisions. But Hugh didn't stop there. He didn't just push people out of power. He ruined them. If someone stood against him, he made sure they lost everything. Even powerful men like the Earl of Lancaster weren't safe. Lancaster was a cousin to the king. But in 1322, after he tried to fight Hugh's control, he was executed. That sent a message. Not even royal blood could protect you from the king's favorite. Hugh wanted his enemies to suffer. Before punishing them, he held fake trials with made-up charges. He made them watch as their wives and children were taken away or locked up. He didn't just take their land, he broke their hearts. People became scared to speak or trust anyone. Hugh had spies everywhere, in homes, churches, even government offices. No one felt safe. Even women weren't spared. Hugh used them like tools. Some were forced into marriages to help his plans. Others, like Lady Alice de Lacy, one of the richest women in England, were taken and kept under his control so he could manage their money and land. This shocked people. It went against everything knights were supposed to stand for: honor, respect, and protecting women. But Hugh didn't stop at hurting nobles. He went after the church too. He took land from churches. He arrested and even tortured bishops like Bishop Adam Orleton for speaking out. Even in medieval times, that was going too far. The final blow came when he turned on the wrong woman, Queen Isabella. She was the king's wife and the daughter of the King of France. But Hugh didn't respect her. He cut off her money, blocked her from speaking to her husband, and treated her with open hate. But Isabella wasn't weak. In 1325, she went to France for peace talks and never came back. She used that chance to escape Hugh's control and start planning his fall. In France, she met with nobles who had fled England because of Hugh's cruelty. And then she found a powerful ally, Roger Mortimer, a lord who had once been Hugh's enemy and escaped his prison. Together, Isabella and Mortimer raised an army. She told the world what Hugh had done, how he broke the law, how he hurt nobles and church leaders, and how he destroyed her marriage and her country. She said Hugh was like a disease in the kingdom, something unnatural and evil, and people believed her. By 1326, Isabella's army was ready. She sailed to England, and something amazing happened. No one tried to stop her. When she landed in Essex, the people cheered. They had suffered long enough. Now they were ready to tear down the king's favorite forever. When Queen Isabella arrived in England with her army, everything changed. The nobles, who had once feared Hugh Despenser, now saw a chance to fight back. They didn't protect the king. They didn't protect Hugh. They walked away. King Edward II and the Despensers ran west toward Wales, hoping to hide in places where Hugh had once been strong. But even there, the people had turned. They knew the queen was coming, and no one wanted to stand in her way. Hugh's power, built on fear and favors, started falling apart. It had looked strong, but it was like sand. It couldn't hold under real pressure. The first to fall was Hugh Despenser the Elder, Hugh's father. He tried to defend Bristol Castle, but Queen Isabella's forces captured him. His punishment was quick, but terrible. He was hanged and cut apart like a traitor. His head was placed on London Bridge to warn others. This is what happens to those who serve evil. But that was just the beginning. The people were waiting for the one they truly blamed, Hugh Despenser the Younger. He was found on November 16, 1326, near Llantrisant in Wales. Witnesses said he looked broken, pale, and terrified. Some say he even tried to take his own life, but he was stopped. There would be no escape. Everyone already knew his fate, but how he would die was something Queen Isabella carefully planned. This wouldn't be just an execution. It would be a lesson. It had to give justice to the people Hugh had hurt. It had to warn others not to follow in his footsteps. And it had to show that no man, not even the king's favorite, was above the law. On November 24th, Hugh Despenser was brought to Hereford for his final punishment. That city was chosen on purpose. It was where Hugh had ruled the strongest, and where Bishop Adam Orleton, one of Hugh's victims, had once been tortured. Thousands of people came to watch. They weren't just curious, they were angry. They wanted to see the man who had hurt their country finally face justice. Hugh didn't get a trial, but a long list of his crimes was read out loud to the crowd. Betraying the kingdom, stealing royal land, hurting nobles and their families, attacking the church, controlling the king in unnatural ways. With each crime, the crowd shouted in agreement. They had waited years for this. The men chosen to carry out the punishment were carefully trained. This would not be a simple hanging. It would be a message carved into history. They stripped Hugh of his clothes and paraded him through the streets. He was no longer a rich man with guards. Now he was just a trembling, frightened prisoner. The crowd mocked him. They threw garbage. They shouted cruel songs about his relationship with the king. The man who had once ruled England from the shadows was now alone, hated, and ready to face a punishment like no other. Hugh Despenser's final day was like a public show, a message to everyone who had watched him rise to power. It began with him tied behind a horse and dragged through the streets of Hereford. His body hit rocks, dirt, and broken roads. People laughed and cheered. By the time he reached the place of execution, Hugh was already hurt and weak. But the worst was still to come. This was no simple hanging. This was planned to hurt, to shame, and to send a warning. First, they hung Hugh by the neck, but not to kill him. The rope was tied just right to make him struggle, choke, and pass out, but still stay alive. When they cut him down, he was barely breathing, but the punishment continued. What came next was meant to humiliate him in front of the whole kingdom. It was done to make a statement that the king's favorite, who once had everything, now had nothing, not even his dignity. Then they cut into his body and removed his organs while keeping him alive. This part was meant to show the people that even someone with great power can be brought low. Each step was slow, planned, and meant to bring pain, not just to Hugh, but to his memory. Some witnesses said Hugh tried to speak, maybe to ask for mercy, maybe to confess. But the crowd shouting and cheering were louder than his voice. The man who once made nobles bow in silence couldn't even make himself heard as he died. Finally, Hugh's body was torn apart. His arms and legs were tied to horses and pulled in different directions. His head was cut off and sent to London Bridge, right next to his father's. Other parts of his body were sent to cities across England as a warning to anyone who might try to rise like he did. To many people, it was a day of celebration. Songs and poems were written to mock him. People sang in the streets. They didn't see it as a punishment. They saw it as justice. Soon after Queen Isabella made her next move, King Edward II was forced to give up his throne. His young son became king, Edward III. But Isabella stayed in charge, ruling as regent. She told the world that she had saved England from Hugh Despenser and the danger of evil advisers, and many believed her. But the memory of what happened to Hugh never faded. For years to come, people in royal courts remembered his death. They were careful not to become too powerful, not to get too close to the king, because they knew what had happened to the last man who did. The death of Hugh Despenser became a warning to all. No matter how high you rise, you can fall, and fall hard. Hugh Despenser's death didn't just end a life. It changed the kingdom. His lands, once some of the biggest in England, were taken and given to Queen Isabella's friends. Families that he had ruined were now rich again. And the people who had helped him, they lost everything. Across Europe, kings and queens were watching. They had seen Hugh's rise to power and his terrible fall, and many believed this was a victory for justice over greed and cruelty. Isabella's fight became a lesson to others. Even powerful favorites could be stopped. Even queens could fight back. But Hugh's death wasn't just about history. It became a model for how traitors were punished for hundreds of years. The cruel way he was executed, with hanging and cutting and tearing, became a legal punishment in England until the 1700s. Even today, historians still talk about it. They ask, did Hugh deserve such a horrible death? Or did his enemies go too far? No one defends the awful things Hugh did. He stole land. He hurt people. He silenced his enemies. But the way he was punished, so slow, so painful, so public, shows how much hate and anger he caused. It also shows something darker. How far people will go when they believe their pain is justice. Some say Hugh's punishment was about more than power. It was about shame, because Hugh was said to be close to the king in ways people didn't accept. His castration, many believe, was a cruel message about that, meant to destroy his body and his name. The people didn't just want Hugh gone. They wanted him forgotten, erased. But we still remember him. And when we do, we don't just learn about him. We learn about ourselves. Hugh's story shows how power can turn dangerous, how fear can become normal, and how cruelty can be made to look like justice. Even good people, smart, educated, and faithful, can believe they're doing the right thing, while doing something truly terrible. So maybe the most important lesson in Hugh Despenser's death is that the line between civilization and cruelty is thinner than we think. It's a line that every kingdom and every person must watch carefully, because once it's crossed, there may be no turning back.